Anaximenes, 585 to 528 BC, was an early pre-Socratic philosopher from the Greek city of Miletus in Ionia, modern-day Turkey. He was a key figure in the Milesian school, a friend and pupil of Anaximander, and he continued the Milesians' philosophical inquiries in the arch, or first principle of the universe, which Anaximenes deemed to be air, and thought to give a quasi-scientific explanation of the world. Nothing is known of his life of Anaximenes, pronounced Anaximenes, other than he was the son of Erystratos of Miletus and was the pupil or companion of Anaximander. Some say that he was also a pupil of Parmenides of Elea, although this seems unlikely. He lived for at least part of his life under Persian rule, and so he may have witnessed the Ionian rebellion against Greek occupation. There is some evidence from letters that he was in communication with Pythagoras, although any influence on Pythagoras' philosophical development was probably minor, other than the desire to explain the world in non-mythological terms. He wrote a book in prose probably within the same framework of natural philosophy as that of Anaximander. Anaximenes ventured on cosmology, cosmogony, and meteorology.
So, these are the significant contribution to philosophy of Anaximenes. So, Anaximenes was a philosopher of ancient Greek world who flourished in the 6th century. So, along with Thales and Anaximander, who was Anaximenes' teacher, made up of the group pre-Socratic philosophers from Miletus. And they were the first Western philosopher. This pre-Socratic used science and logic to determine the principles that govern the universe. They were also searching for an original substance and called the arche, which was the source and the cause of everything else. So even though we don't know much about Anaximenes, we know that he thought the arche was air, and his theories about the formation and the mechanisms of the universe can be traced back to his theory about air. According to Anaximenes, the Earth is a broad disk floating on the circumambient air. The sun and stars he held were formed by the same processes of condensation and rarefaction, and the flaming nature of these bodies is merely due to the velocity of their motions. He also used his principles to account of various natural phenomena. Thunder and lightning results from wind breaking out of clouds. Rainbows are the result of the rays of the sun falling on clouds. Earthquakes also are caused by the cracking of the earth when it dries out after being moistened by rains. Hail is a result of frozen rainwater, or etc. Anaximenes' assumption that air is everlastingly in motion suggests that he thought it also possessed life. Because it was eternally alive, air took on qualities of the divine and became the cause of other gods as well as of all matter. The same motion accounts for the shift from one physical state of the air to another. There is evidence that he made the common analogy between the divine air that sustains the universe and the human air or soul that animates people, such as comparison between a macrocosm and a microcosm, would also permit him to maintain a unity behind diversity as well as to reinforce the view of the contemporaries that there is an overarching principle regulating all life and behavior. So Anaximenes also equated the first material principle with the divine, so that effectively air is God, both being infinite and eternal. Thus, the pantheon of Greek gods were merely derivations of the truly divine air. Similarly, the souls of the individuals were also composed of air or breath, and hold us together in the same way as air encompasses the entire world. Anaximenes substituted air for his predecessors' choices. His writings, which survive into the Hellenistic age, no longer exist except in passages in the works of the later authors. Consequently, interpretations of his beliefs are frequently in conflict. It is clear, however, that he believed in the degrees of condensation of moisture that corresponded to the densities of various types of matter. When most eventually distributed, air is the common invisible air of the atmosphere. By condensation, it becomes visible, first as mist or cloud, that as water, and finally as solid matter such as earth or stones. If further rarefied, it turns to fire. Thus hotness and dryness typify rarity, whereas coldness and wetness are related to denser matter.
Like the other Malaysian philosophers before him, Anaximenes' main concern was to identify the single source of all things in the universe, monism. He believed in material monism, namely the view that everything is made up of one stuff. Anaximenes supported this air monism on the grounds that air can vary in density, which could explain why there's so many different elements on a macro scale. If the air is loose or not packed together, it forms fire. If it's more densely packed together, it becomes wind. If it's denser, it still forms elements like water and earth, the densest being stone. This might sound quite scientific, but his description is much vague than that. Nonetheless, Anaximenes was still very interested in explaining natural phenomena like, for instance, hot and cold.
So, lastly, Anaximenes arguably took a step backwards by revisiting the notion that a single element was indeed the source of all things, and that element he deemed to be air, actually the Greek word air, also denotes mist or vapor, as well as the normal air was breath. He held that one time everything was air, and that even now everything is air at different degrees of density. Since air is infinite and perpetually in motion, it can produce all things without being actually produced by anything. And lastly, what is the personal learning insights of this topic are to Anaximenes? So Anaximenes considered the earth to be a flat piece of material that was floating on air. Other celestial bodies like the stars were formed when the earth let out excess air and then condensed into solid materials. Anaximenes also explained natural phenomena on earth by this theory on air. Anaximenes also equated the first material principle with the divine, so that effectively air is God, both being infinite and eternal. Thus, the pantheon of Greek gods were merely derivations of the truly divine air.